I'd like to introduce our friend Bill Simpich. Bill Simpich is a civil rights attorney from San Francisco. He's also someone who is sufficiently motivated to share information that is the result of his scholarship and his research at no charge through the auspices of the Mary Farrell Foundation, and we urge all who are interested to do two things. One is to go to Rex Bradford's site, maryfarrellfoundation.org, is it? Yes? maryfarrell.org. You can read all of State Secret Wiretapping in Mexico City, Double Agents in the Framing of Lee Oswald, and you can make a much needed and much warranted contribution to the Mary Farrell Foundation. Help me welcome Bill Simpich. Oh, I have no idea.
You have no idea?
I can't know everything.
Okay. Well, I'll ask for help on the clicker. But I'm going to keep it short because it's late. I'm really glad it went overtime because having Mr. Frazier and Mr. Vesiana tell their stories was worth its weight in gold.
It was, yeah.
So no worries on my end. I'm glad to see anybody here after all these hours. I've offered a counter-narrative to the Warren Report. This is kind of cribbed from the last couple chapters of my book, but I did it kind of trying to respond to Jeff Morley's challenge about how, the other side has one story and we have 1,000 stories, which is good. But at the end of the day, when you want to persuade people, you need one story, or at least an approach, as to how to counter the Warren Report. And this is my effort. Obviously, it's going to be short, and obviously, it doesn't try to incorporate everything, but it tells a story. And I use the Tippit saga to help tell the story because I think it's warranted. So take a look at the last two chapters of my book at maryfarrell.org. It's on the front page. And I wanted to also say that in terms of analyzing, I think it's helpful to think of everybody covering up. In the hours after the assassination, there was worry about World War III. And you get it from both the White House and from Hoover in the hours immediately after, that there's one shooter and it's Oswald. And I think this is the big state secret, is that they put the hammer down to clamp it up. When you got McGeorge Bundy pushing the story, I'm not yet convinced McGeorge Bundy is the center of the conspiracy. I do think he's worried about national security. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. Most of it is a cover-up, but there's a couple people I think had foreknowledge, and we're going to get to them in this counter-narrative. This is a counter-narrative that was held back from everybody on the Warren Report and the Warren commissioners, except for Gerald Ford and Alan Dulles, all said that they were, lied to, not given enough information, and the rest. So we have had our history stolen from us, in my humble opinion. Now, here's a famous photo, obviously. If you were standing on the street, or even across the way, are you going to see somebody who's 5'10", 165, with a 30-30 or a Winchester like Don just showed us a few minutes ago? The first thing, if you see anything, is you're going to notice their clothes. But the description's absent of clothes. You're not going to be able to tell it's 5'10", 165, any of that. Now, the saga here, boy, I could better put my glasses on for this part because I got to read my own text. At 12:44, Murray Jackson, who was the old partner of J.D. Tippit, receives this call. The call comes from Sawyer, who's downtown, the inspector, 5'10", 165. Who did Sawyer get it from? This unidentified citizen. And the unidentified citizen is the source. Even Hoover said it wasn't Howard Brennan. You folks probably know the Howard Brennan story. Hoover put in writing it was not Howard Brennan. Furthermore, the 5'10", 165 description comes from the Oswald description in the CIA and FBI records. Is it just an accident? More to the point, why don't CIA or FBI comment, wow, this dispatch matches our report just perfectly. You never hear that once. Why? Because they know there's a problem. Now, there's also that aspect that we saw a minute ago about carrying 30-30 or some kind of Winchester rifle. This was hot information, and by 1:07, Shanklin called Hoover and told him JFK was shot with a Winchester. We'll come back to that later on. Now, I want to turn to what happened when the description was called in. Murray Jackson, as we heard, calls Tippit into Oak Cliff, which is far away from downtown. Tippit makes a number of frantic stops in the next 20 minutes. One of them was right by Kathy Kay's house at 8th and Lancaster. Another one was at the Top 10 record store. He tries to use the phone, and then he comes running out in great frustration. Lee Oswald, according to the proprietors, was in there that morning buying tickets for a show. I mean, and who knows whether it was Oswald or not, but there's a lot going on in Top 10 that day, is what I'm saying. Now, get this. Joe McBride, who wrote the great book on the Tippit story, Into the Nightmare, I recommend it. He interviewed Tippit's father before he died. Tippit's wife isn't talking, but Tippit's father was talking, and he said Tippit was looking for Oswald. I mean, you got to wrap your mind around that. That's big. And that's what he was told by all the guys on the force, quote unquote. So there's a hunt going on by Tippit for Oswald. I accept that. Two witnesses saw Oswald at the theater before Tippit was killed. One of them was the manager, Butch Burroughs. He says, I sold him popcorn shortly after 1 o'clock. You just can't get past that kind of evidence. Now, here's a second unidentified man, and he tells Jerry Hill, who's Westbrook's junior. We'll talk about Westbrook in a minute. 5'10", 160, 170 pounds, wearing a jacket. By the way, the jacket winds up in Westbrook's hands. Westbrook happens to find the jacket. So two guys in the personnel division who have no business being on this case at all because it's not their beat, are out in the street directing traffic and finding stuff. Then a third unidentified man at the Tippit crime scene comes up with a wallet. And he hands it, actually not to Olson, but to Officer Kenneth Croy. And Croy takes credit for it. He puts it in writing, and he's mentioned it and was interviewed a number of times before he died, claiming he was the guy who had the wallet. No one, on the other hand, sees a wallet on the ground. Croy got there right when Tippit was being taken away in the ambulance. All the civilians on the scene were interviewed. None of them saw or testified to any business about a wallet. We only see the wallet in Westbrook's hands. And Westbrook, you'll see here, that's Owens, Croy's superior, and that's Westbrook in plain clothes. Because again, here's the guy in plain clothes. He's a captain, and he's run out to 10th and Patton, and he's running the crime scene. And then he leads, as you'll see, into a merry chase to the theater, where he's leading that. He's never done an investigation in his life. And here he is doing two of the most important investigations in American history. The wallet is worth noting. We'll talk about all the business about the wallet in a second. Here's the skinny on Pinky Westbrook. He was the ranking officer at the Tippit crime scene in the Texas Theater. His junior, Jerry Hill's on the 6th floor helping to find the shells, the Tippit crime scene, and the Texas Theater. Westbrook didn't wear a uniform, no experience, captain of personnel, and he had access to everybody's files. When you were applying for a job, Pinky read your stuff. And he did all the background investigations of applicants and also when somebody got in trouble. So the thinking on him is that he may have been CIA affiliated because he left 3 years later and worked for Office of Public Security in Vietnam, which was the go-between between the CIA and the South Vietnamese police. It's not unusual for intelligence agencies to work not only with the intel people at the police department, but also key officers. And I'm going to offer to you that Westbrook was a key officer. He had all this information on personnel. And I call him the Ann Egerter of the Dallas police. Ann Egerter did the same kind of thing with James Angleton on the CIA side. Now, we saw a better picture of Hidell. I'm not going to try to blow it up here, but the point here with the Hidell photo is that you've got the Oswald-Hidell ID combined together. And I think it was basically a calling card that Lee Oswald created during his life to carry around when he needed it to show what he could do as a photographer, because after all, people in that era all knew draft cards, and photos weren't on draft cards, so it stuck out. It was memorable. I think, and there's lots of evidence to prove, to indicate that Oswald created it, but I'm unconvinced he carried it that day. If he did, he had a good reason. It was not to prove that he shot the president or Officer Tippit. Okay, at the crime scene at the theater, we've seen Westbrook holding the wallet at the Tippit crime scene. Now, we have a fellow named Barrett who works, and still alive, worked for the FBI, and he was on the scene, and he is alive today and says that Westbrook asked him at the scene, "Have you ever heard of Oswald?" as he's looking at the wallet. And then he asked him, "Have you ever heard of Hidell?" Now, Hidell is the first day evidence that linked Oswald to the rifle and the revolver, because I think a lot of you know that when those two items were ordered, they were ordered in the name of Hidell, not Oswald. This is the link that put them together in the public mind. Westbrook and Barrett go to the theater and they enter together. They're directed towards Oswald by Johnny Brewer, the shoe store guy next door. After Oswald's apprehended, Westbrook orders a list of patrons. There's about 20 patrons in the theater who knew what had happened, that they had seen, and a lot of them saw this fellow Oswald going from seat to seat, apparently looking for some kind of contact. But this list that Westbrook ordered disappeared. Nobody ever saw it again. 20 people on it, it's all gone. Oswald admitted that the ID belonged to him eventually, but nothing more. He would not talk about it, and I think he had good reasons why he didn't want to talk about it, because there's a lot of story behind that ID. Now, in terms of the Dallas Police Department reports, there's no mention of the Hidell ID. None whatsoever for days and days and days. And Bentley, who is the fella who was the head of polygraphs, who has denied all along that Mr. Frazier was ever polygraphed, even though other documents will illustrate that he was polygraphed. And Bentley, if anybody had a friend at the CIA, it was probably Bentley. Bentley went up to the balcony, comes running down, full tilt, and he tore his tendon, sprained his ankle. I've heard both stories. Bottom line was he was laid up. The next day he's on TV, he's on crutches. And a number of people think that you gotta wonder if Oswald was supposed to survive in that theater. And if Bentley wasn't a little too excited about what he was doing before he tore his tendon. Bentley took Oswald in tow and literally maneuvered him into the car. Oswald's in the middle, and Bentley's sitting left rear. And Bentley magically comes up with a wallet for Oswald, and he finds the Hidell ID. So now you've got Westbrook finding the Hidell ID, and Bentley finding the Hidell ID. And Barrett, who was in the middle of all this, remember, he was the one who heard it all from Westbrook. Barrett just calls Bentley's story hogwash. Here is an FBI guy talking about what happened on the scene, calling Bentley a liar, okay? And he says, well, I didn't want to, I figured they were just trying to get their story straight, it was just a bureaucratic problem. But the problem is the wallet that was found on the street didn't ever go into evidence and was never discussed for 34 years until Hosty blew the whistle in his book. And why is there so much mystery about this Hidell ID? Bentley says, oh, I talked about it all over the police tape, but there's zero about the Hidell ID on the police tape when you read it or listen to it. So there's something very wrong here. Bentley denied or did not mention anything about finding the wallet and the ID until June, when they were wrapping up the Warren report, only then. So the first report you do see on it is not from the Dallas cops. It's from military intelligence at 3:15 p.m. from Robert Jones, the same guy who eventually testified about how all the military ID stuff was missing in 1973. 3:15 p.m., he writes a report, says it's out there. He says he got it from the ID division at Dallas. And Hoover gets into the middle of it, says, get full info on this card. And I think this is national security stuff. They did not want any mention of this card in the initial police reports. I think they said, keep it out of it. Now, again, the ID links the rifle and the pistol. The next morning, the FBI discovers Hidell had mail-ordered the Carcano, later the pistol as well. The rifle and pistol went to Oswald's P.O. box in March. Inspector Harry Holmes, remember him, admitted anyone could pick up the rifle or pistol without showing ID. Then that afternoon, the DA then announces the discovery of the Hidell card. And now, the previous day, Henry Wade is saying, well, I think more than one person was involved. Now he's fully on board and says, it's one person, it's Oswald, it's done, it's over. And that week, you see in Time and Newsweek and all the papers, the Hidell Oswald card, and gets it across to the public. See, it's irrefutable. This case is done. Now, it looks like I think there was two wallets. We could argue, but I don't think it matters all that much. It is clear there's a big link. They're made by the same manufacturer. They look very similar. Both of them have circular snaps, metal strips, and a zipper over the main compartment. This is the arrest wallet. And then you see these drawings that our friend Dale Myers, who doesn't know what to do with this evidence. He's a lone nut guy, so. But he is really stumped on this one. So, bottom line, my clicker is losing its power or something.
It happens to the best of us.
Well, I need technical help. I really do. Did we lose our technician? I want to go backwards again for just a second. But I'm going to have to shout it out. One more? Okay. The other has rounded corners and a metal band that does not run from edge to edge. I don't want to dwell on this because I don't think it's particularly important. You could fight about this stuff for hours. The point is they look very similar. And why? It looks like an operation. On the pistol and the rifle, a very quick thing I want to mention is, remember Carl Day, another guy you got to wonder about in his relations with intelligence? He's holding the rifle in the air the whole time. I don't think he wanted anybody to sniff that rifle. And similarly, I don't think, this is a quote given to Jones Harris from Jerry Hill. I can assure you, no one sniffed the pistol in Oswald's possession. That's a bit of a slip. Why would you say that? Because people argue vehemently, does sniffing it prove it was fired or not? Reasonable minds differ, but why would you refuse to sniff it? Because you didn't want to create anything that might be exculpatory, is the point. And Robert Frazier at the FBI also said the barrel of the rifle was corroded with rust. It appeared that it had not been recently fired. So let me end by going through a few of the forensic items to just show how nonsensical the forensic case is on the firearms. There's several cartridge hulls found at the Tippit crime scene. Lavelle, the guy who was chained to Oswald when he got shot in the white suit, he was interviewed by my friend who wrote Into the Nightmare, Joe McBride. He admitted the hulls were never marked on the scene by Dallas officer Poe. Poe, who testified to the Warren Commission, they were marked, but they weren't marked, it turns out. So now he says, I have memory problems. And then he went further. Now he just won't talk about it. The HSEA relied solely on the hulls to make its case that Oswald shot Tippit. The failure to mark the hulls, you don't have enough evidence to prove you got a homicide case against Oswald. Now, let's go to the JFK side of the case for a minute. Four shots, everybody agreed, would indicate more than one shooter. So I remember I was 12 years old, but even then the consensus kept being, it's 3 shots, 3 shots, 3 shots, not 4 or 5 or more. The ideal was a one-shooter case focusing on the shooter in custody. As everybody realizes, that terrible afternoon rolled on. How do you show that 3 shots emanated from the 6th floor window? The evidence photos don't show 3 cartridge cases on the 6th floor. They show 2 hulls and 1 live round. And I don't know how well you can see it, but Exhibit 510 and 716 both show those are not 3 hulls, it's 2 hulls and 1 live round. I'm having the same problem. I can't go backwards. If you can go backwards one for me? Thank you. The Dallas Police Inventory lists 2 spent 6.5 hulls and 1 live round. The FBI report of the photographing of the evidence says the same. This FBI report was unreleased till many months after the Warren report. There's another one. You can see it a little bit better in that bottom left-hand corner. That's a full round. That's not a shell. And this is the FBI pictures. It's 2:15 in the afternoon. All right, two hulls, you know, and there's a live round. And then there's live round 6.5, 2 rounds. And then it gets changed from 2 to 3. They did a better job the second time. Now, they say this, and again, I just kept piling this stuff up because I just got so fed up. Hedging the bets at the 6th floor. I think what's going on here was they were trying to decide whether, you saw how Fritz treated Mr. Frazier with the confession saying, sign here. Well, was the official story going to be 2 shots or 3 shots? I think Fritz wanted to leave a little wiggle room for the story to change if needed. So what Homicide Chief Fritz did was he kept one of the hulls. And he said, well, I need it for comparison checks to see where the bullets were obtained. Well, if you're going to do that, why don't you take the live round and use that for your comparison instead of some shell? I mean, that's idiotic. And they also said, well, that dented shell would have come out and it didn't match and this and that, but that's just idiotic. And the only other thing that was even more idiotic was for them to list in 510 and 716 in the Warren report, these are 3 cartridge cases. These are 3 shells. I don't know what to say about people who put together reports like that. This is more of the same. This is from the FBI. They took the photos again in the afternoon on November 22nd. And they got the 1 live round of ammo from Fritz. I mean, Fritz was probably sitting there going, which one should I give him, you know? Right into that moment. So finally, I want to talk about 399 to wrap up. The magic bullet. It was found on the stretcher by Gerald Tomlinson, and then he gives it to Personnel Officer O.P. Wright. Wright was an ex-officer. He knew ammo inside out, and he has a real definite opinion of it as being a pointed round, not a round round, but a pointed item. Then he gave it to Joe Hansen at the Secret Service. He's supposed to initial it. He doesn't initial it. Joe Hansen gets on the plane, flies to with the body and everybody else to Washington, and he hands it to the chief of the Secret Service, James Rowley. And Rowley's initials aren't on it either. None of these 4 guys recognized the round bullet known as CE-399, the pristine bullet that doesn't look like it's ever been fired. Wright, new ammo, said it was not only that it was pointed, but that it looked like a .30-30. So you got to wonder whether somebody didn't just drop a little pointed thing to match the story when the stretcher was lying out there in the middle of Parkland Hospital. This is I don't have time to go through all this. We've been here a long time. But the bottom line is John Hunt did a wonderful memo and investigation proving that the initials that are on there are from the FBI lab people, not from the Secret Service, not from the FBI. What happened to the chain of custody? Rowley passed it on to the FBI Elmer Todd, the agent, and he insists up and down he initialed it before a lab delivery, but you can't find his initials on it either, just the lab men. The original pointed .30-30 bullet was replaced with what we have today. In other words, I'm saying it's quite possible they changed it twice. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could have been 1 person, 2 people maneuvering the evidence. But there's something very crazy going on with 399. We've all spent a lot of time trying to untangle it. This is one possible approach towards it, or leading towards it. And it's so sensitive. You'll see a 67 report saying, you know what? Wright and Tomlinson recognized the bullet after all. Hallelujah. We don't have a problem anymore. And Tink, Thompson, and Gary Aguilar unearthed that, and they went to Wright, and Wright said, that's not true. That's not true. I didn't recognize that bullet. And he actually gave Tink appointed 3030, saying this is what it looked like. They went to Odom 35 years later in 2002. He goes, I didn't write that report at all. Period. End of sentence. So the summation, the firearms evidence, the wallet evidence, the ID evidence, every bit of it is untrustworthy, no probable cause. There wasn't even enough to indict, much less convict. 5'10" description was in the intelligence files. A 30-30 Winchester indicates, doesn't prove, but you could get a pointed bullet in there, no problem. A pointed bullet was reported. The bullet in evidence is round with no initials. A wallet was left on the Tippit crime scene and covered up, similar, if not identical, to the arrest wallet. The Hidell Oswald card linked Oswald to the Carcano rifle and the pistol. No one ever admitted to sniffing the rifle or the pistol, the first thing many people would do. And there's no chain of custody for the hulls for the pistol. 2 hulls, not 3, were found on the 6th floor. And I think it's up to everybody's best thinking on this, but who has foreknowledge here about this wallet in 1963 being found at the Oswald, at the Tippit crime scene? Westbrook. Isn't this the biggest piece of evidence you've ever seen that would nail Oswald to the wall? That's it. And who's there right on the scene and alive today? Barrett. And he saw it, and he says Bentley's a liar for saying that he's the one who found the wallet. So Westbrook, at a minimum, should be treated as a suspect. And I think you could do it a different way, but the chain of custody problem is so immense, as many people have said over the years. I think the chain of custody is the center of destroying the Warren Report, of constructing a counter-narrative, whether it's 10 seconds or 1 minute or 20 minutes like I've done today, that nails it down. Thank you.
Bill, let me ask you a quick question. We're aware that, do we know that Murray Jackson is gone?
He's dead.
Okay, so we can't ask him anything. Do we think it's significant in any way that he was not the usual dispatcher? I believe, if I understand it, the usual dispatcher was at the Trade Mart for some reason?
Other people consider Murray Jackson a suspect. I'm not quite at that level, but I wouldn't blame somebody who was. And we've been at it, so I don't need questions, but fire away.
I have a very dumb question, very short.
No dumb questions.
Right.
What would be the motive for killing Tippit?
Well, that's one of the great conundrums. We could spend an hour over dinner on that one. But I think it was to fire up the police department so they would do anything to bring down the man. And I really do believe that. That's my belief.
To bring down
Oswald. Whoever was fingered.
In other words, a cop killer, anybody identified as a cop killer, it's a death warrant on site.
the same motive for allowing the Pentagon to be hit to rile up the military.
We could have fun with that over dinner, too.
Just a quick thing. It was Senator Eastland and Senator Dodd. They were doing that firearms investigation, which might have been the whole thing where he used the name and whatever came of any of that.
Well, they did find, I remember Dodd's investigation did notice that they got an order from the Klein's gun shop, actually came up in their report. At the end of the day, they didn't define it as Klein's, but it seemed to be one and the same.
Just real quick, you mentioned at the beginning, that you need a new narrative, to counter the main one. And I wonder if you've thought about animating this or turning it into a movie with just a documentary, one after the other, pounding this crap in,
We've got to go visual on this stuff, and we have to go, I'm going to redo my book at some point, and I'm going to have an illustrator for just that reason, and somebody who's a little younger than me has to animate this stuff, because it's too much fun to just...
You may be aware that Dr. John Newman, or perhaps you don't, Dr. John Newman's work is the basis of a rap video that was released last November 22nd on YouTube. The name of which, well, it's just, whoever produced it, there are people familiar with Dr. Newman's work. And the name that you can search for at YouTube is Who Killed Kennedy? In fact, we may end up playing that here maybe sometime before the end of our conference, but not before, not tonight.
Well, anyway, short animated narratives, I think, are the way to go for the future.
Just very, very, very quick, but just in
Yeah.
response to the last point, Tippit shows up in Ruby's notebooks, and just hearing all this with Tippit and Olson, there seems to be something going on, and there may have been something that had to be cleaned up with regard to Tippit. I think so.
Well,
but
yeah.
there's just more connections with Ruby that are worth looking into that might give an answer to that.
Well, let me offer two quick things on that. One is that when this guy, Officer Croy, is a bad apple, I think, the guy who came up with the wallet. I've been thinking about this wallet story for about 20 years. And I went back this year and took a look at Croy's Warren Commission testimony, and he was there for Ruby, too. He's another Johnny on the spot. And he's like one of the people hiding Ruby's body. Somebody compared Croy. He said, well, you know, if Ruby's the quarterback, then, you know, he's the fullback. And it's just, the Tippit story, the other thing I wanted to say was, you heard the Carl Mather thing that Don Thomas did such a great job with? Well, Jones Harris told me that when Mather and Tippit were friends, Mather and Tippit met the morning of November 22nd at Tippit's home. Okay, this is really uncontroversial. And furthermore, that after Tippit died, Mr. and Mrs. Mather went to the Tippit home to console the widow, but then Mrs. Mather went home while Mr. Mather continued to console the widow. Which is a first in American history, I think. And the thinking, of course, is not only why would the gentleman be consoling the widow? And it's because Mrs. Mather needed to be handling the phones. That's a little bit of speculation. But there's something extremely odd about the Mather story. I think that the Tippit had to go. Something had gone wrong. And everything kind of went south after Kennedy died. The whole thing started falling apart, and Oswald lived, and Tippit died.
Last November, I took a tour, you know, of the Tippit murder scene with the COPA conference. And the guide said that after Tippit died, they took his body right to the funeral home. They didn't take the body to a hospital. They took it right to the funeral home, which was only a couple blocks away. Is that correct? Okay.
But they spent 40 years arguing that wallet was Tippit's, and it finally took Marie Tippit practically to end the controversy. I think she didn't want that discussion going on anymore. All right, is that it? Thank you.
Thank you.